Prabda Yoon is an artist, filmmaker, writer, publisher, and translator. He lives in Bangkok, Thailand. After studying graphic design and visual communication in the US, he embarked on a prolific career, authoring a remarkable collection of 20 fiction books encompassing both short stories and novels. As a designer, Yoon designed over 100 book covers, lending his creative touch to numerous publications. His artistic works have been exhibited regularly in Thailand and Japan, gaining recognition and appreciation in various art exhibitions. As a translator, Yoon brought Western literary classics to Thai readers, which includes Nabokov's Lolita and J.D. Salinger's iconic Catcher in the Rye. He won the prestigious S.E.A award in 2002 for a story collection, Kwam Na Ja Pen. In 2021, Yoon's significant contribution to arts and culture won him the Fukuoka Prize. The sad part was a poignant collection of 12 short stories from Yoon's acclaimed Kwam Na Ja Pen found international acclaim with its English translation by Mui Pupok published by Tilted Axis Press in the UK. The book marked a historic moment as the first ever translation of Thai fiction to be released in the UK. Additionally, Yoon's second story collection, Moving Parts, also translated by Mui Pupok further cemented his reputation as a writer with global appeal. Prabda Yoon's stories offer a meditative study of modern Thai life, deftly weaving together urban alienation and surrealism themes. Through his experimental storytelling, Yoon delves into the complexities of human relationships and the emotional landscapes of his characters, who often grapple with loneliness and isolation. To buy his books, you can use the links given in the show notes. Prabda, welcome to our podcast, Harshanayam.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Normally, this should be my last question, but you being an artist, filmmaker, publisher, writer, translator, sculptor, you own a bookstore too in Bangkok.
Actually, I don't own a bookstore anymore.
I'm inquisitive to know what are you currently working on?
I am producing a uh, television series for a streaming service. That's that's my main work at the moment because it takes quite a long time to get a television series done. Um, this particular project will take a total of 2 years. So it takes most of my time, but I'm also writing. I'm writing
Mhm.
a novel that I hope to finish this year sometime if I can.
At a very early age of 14, I think you started writing, or 13 maybe. So, what were those early literary influences in your life?
When I was young, I read a lot of translated fiction. And in Thailand, we used to have a lot of translated books um, when they were sort of translated and published illegally, so to speak. um,
Okay.
um, and I was quite a fan of detective fiction. So Sherlock Holmes, Agatha Christie, when I was young. So I was really interested in mystery. Um, but but then I was reading also, stories by Tolstoy. At the time in Thailand, there was a trend among Thai writers to write about, social injustice and inequality, very much influenced by left wing politics, uh, like after World War II. So I was also reading short stories that were, in that period, um, of that trend as well. And so my stories were a little bit of a mixture of mystery, fantasy, and social commentary. I,
Mm-hmm,
I
mm-hmm.
was I wrote a couple of stories that I sent to a magazine, and they were sort of about working class conditions that were sort of depicted in a fantastical way. It's hard to explain, but I wasn't really writing very realistic stories, but there was a kind of you know class commentary attached to the stories as well.
You left for the United States for studies at the age of 16,
Yeah.
and you came back home after more than a decade and started writing again.
Yes.
What kind of changes you witnessed in social life in the country?
A lot, because when I was in the States, I almost never, because I had to study and I was having these all kinds of new experiences as a young man. Um, I didn't pay too much attention to what was going on in Thailand. So I completely lost touch uh, with Thai society. When I came back, it was a little bit of a shock, and it took some getting used to. Um, but Thailand changed a lot while I was gone. It became much more modern. Um, you know, the city of Bangkok was growing very fast. But at the same time, I came back in 1998, and it was just very fresh of the so-called Tom Yam Gung crisis.
Currency crisis?
Yeah. So that was a huge event in modern Thai history. A lot of people lost their jobs, and um, so it was kind of a strange period to come back to. Um, while the city was very, you know, westernized, but because of that crisis, a lot of things were stopped. Um, so yeah, people were still just like coming out of that their problems, and trying to reconstruct everything, to rebuild their families again, their businesses again. So and I when I was in the States, all that happened, and I wasn't really aware of what the Thai people were going through. So when I came back, I had to learn a lot about what was going on in Thailand in terms of the economy, in terms of politics, um, or just like social life in general was completely new.
So, political situation also, there was a lot of change, you mean to say?
Yes, when I came back, it was just before uh, a big election that I don't know if you familiar with Thai politics, but
Not much.
but um, but a few years just after I came back, there was a huge election that a pro democracy party won landslide uh,
Mhm.
in the election, and then a few years later, a couple of years later, there was a military coup. So the early 2000s and the late 90s, uh, there were a lot of changes going on in Thailand. Yeah.
So, when it comes to writing,
Mm.
to express yourself, you have a lot of other ways too.
Mm-hmm.
You are an artist,
Mm-hmm.
you are a filmmaker. Specifically, when do you resort to writing?
You mean as a profession, or
As a writer, fiction writer.
it's so hard to explain because as an artist, I find that different medium is good for different kinds of expression. So when I paint, I don't feel the same way I feel when I'm writing. When I write, I pretty much try to express my reflections on what's going on around me, and sometimes I include my own uh, philosophical um, outlooks on life, on society, or my opinions about what's going on, in everyday life in Thailand, for example. But in painting, I prefer to not to think so much. So it's a kind of a more abstract expression. Um, Sculpture also, filmmaking is closer to writing fiction, but
Okay.
also because it's visual. um, I I since I have interest in visual arts, when I make films, I also am drawn to like the cinematic quality of the medium. So it's all different. I write when I'm frustrated, I think.
That's- so you also designed a lot of book covers, about 100 or so.
Yeah,
The other day I was watching. Mm, you gave a presentation, Turin, I believe, in
in
Italy,
Turin,
about your
yes,
book cover. Yeah, right.
yes.
So everything is so abstract,
Mm.
but I learned during the presentation that you read the books thoroughly
Hmm.
before designing the book cover.
Yeah.
So why do you do it, designing book
Oh, I
covers?
love book covers. I when I was studying in art school, my main interest was in graphic design, um, because apart from, and I do have a real interest and not passion, but like I love to look at beautiful books and things like that. Um, so I'm drawn towards that naturally, but at the same time, when I was studying, I thought that that could be the
Hmm.
realistic career path for me.
Okay.
I never thought I would
Okay.
become, like a writer or an artist.
Right.
I thought that that was like the closest I could get to doing what I loved. Um,
Right.
but I kept doing it because I just like it. I feel like when you read something, and you find the book meaningful to you, you also want the whole object, the physical object of the book to be beautiful, or to convey the same kind of quality that you get from reading it.
Right.
You know, so I'm one of those readers who, like after I finish a book, I close it and I touch the, like I sort of like fondle the cover, that
Oh,
and smell the paper. I love it as an object as well.
you have even translated some classics from English.
Yeah.
You translated Salinger and Nabokov into Thai.
Hmm.
What made you choose Lolita and Catcher in the Rye?
Well, to be honest, I didn't choose them. I I was approached by a publishing house. Uh, they wanted to translate these titles, and first I was approached for Salinger, I think, if I remember correctly. And the Catcher in the Rye was one of my favorite books when I was a teenager. So I was happy to consider it. I didn't have the confidence to accept the offer right away because I thought, the language of Salinger is very unique, and I wasn't sure that I would be able to translate it to Thai or to do it justice. So I hesitated when I was approached, but eventually I said yes, and it took me quite some time to get used to the process of translating something, of such, because Catcher in the Rye is such a legendary title. Uh, so there's obviously a lot of expectation, from the readers, and yeah, but eventually you have to say, well, you can't worry too much, you have to do it. Yeah, and Lolita was even harder because the language, I mean, the prose is so complex. Nabokov is well known for his um, allusions to other literature, other philosophy, myth and things like that. So it took a long time to work on Lolita, but still not enough time. I mean, I felt like I would need about 10 years or something to translate Lolita, but practically speaking, that was just not possible. So in the end, it was like maybe I took like a year and a half um, or something on Lolita.
You continue to translate books into Thai now?
At the moment, no. I gave up after I translated Lolita. I think. I mean, I translated another one by Nabokov called Panin,
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
which I liked. Also, that was fun to translate. But the experience of translating Lolita was so painful. I sort of told myself as I was finishing Lolita, I just sort of said, "This is going to be my last book to translate."
Okay. Okay. So, how do you look at translation as an art form?
Oh, I totally think it's an art, because I think that uh, you know to think that anyone can make a perfect translation of any language or any novel, I think is a little bit delusional. I mean, you can have a very good translation, but it's never going to be the same as the original. You won't get like the nuances in the language um, the same way that you get from the language that you've known since birth. So I think it's an art in a sense that the translator has to find, you have to act like a almost a kind of medium, and find a similar attitude, or similar atmosphere, similar um, sensibility that is close enough to the original, but at the same time would work uh, in that particular language that you're translating to as well. There are many schools of translation, and some, like even in Thailand, some translators believe that it's best to be able to like translate exactly word for word, you know, in in a from a novel. But I don't believe that at all. I'm of the school that think a good translation is something that you know you have to do whatever you can to be able to convey the same sort of attitude um, of a work that you're translating into your language, uh, even if it means that you have to adjust the original a little bit, or change some words to make it work in your own language. because not every you you don't have like two languages that are exactly alike so much that you can translate the exact words to another language.
Do you think that the translating these helped your writing too, honing your skills in writing?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like almost like taking a lesson with the
Mhm.
with the writer of the book I'm translating. So uh, you learn, what works. There are also some tricks that you learn from translating, because after a while you realize how that particular writer, uh, you know, bring you into the world that he's creating. I mean, there are some tricks in writing. So also you learn what not to do as well. I find that maybe most useful.
For example.
I recognize Nabokov's greatness, and I do believe that he was a genius in a way. He was really talented and a very unique prose stylist. But at the same time, I find the way he wrote a little bit annoying. So I try not to do that when I catch myself, like writing something similar, like a sentence that is similar to how he would write, and I would correct myself. He tends to have a lot of interruptions in between sentences. And I mean, a lot of time it's clever, because what he's doing is he's playing with the sentence, or he's, like creating uh, puns, or, like play with words and things like that. But sometimes it's just not smooth reading. So like, like I prefer the experience of reading to be also, like not so noticeable that you're reading, because I find it a little bit distracting from the story. Um, I mean, in my own writing. So yeah, I learned things like that from translating books.
In the year 2000, I guess you have come out with your short story collections. And
Yeah.
this Kwam Na Ja Pen, I hope I'm
Mm,
pronouncing it properly.
almost.
Yeah, almost. Thank you. The original Thai version of the sad part was
Hmm.
you were credited with bringing in a new wave of writing, right?
Mm.
Were you conscious of that and the kind of positive response it created? It won many awards for you. Were you surprised by it?
Yeah, I wasn't aware. I wasn't conscious that I was bringing something new to Thai literature, because I just thought that what I was writing was very similar to something that was quite already common in the West. Uh, when I was in the States, I read a lot of American literature or translation from European um, literature, and so like the stories I wrote were not that uncommon. If I were to write in the States, I would not be considered somebody uh, very special. So I yeah, and but I was not aware of uh, what Thai contemporary Thai literature was like at the time. I had just returned to Thailand, and I knew no writers. I was not part of the community of Thai writers then. Um, yeah, so it was surprising.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What were those books you read in USA?
So many. I knew so many writers from the time that I was in the States.
Mhm.
So it was my almost like a formative
Right.
years of getting to know literature. So Kafka, all the very very usual usual
Okay.
suspects. Kafka, Beckett, Joyce, uh, Gertrude Stein.
Mm-hmm.
I was very drawn towards modernist literature.
Mm-hmm.
So all those people, Gertrude Stein, uh, Camus, John Barth.
Mm-hmm.
But I was also interested in poetry, although I don't write so much poetry. But I was inspired by a lot of poets like E. E. Cummings, William Carlos Williams. Many people. Uh,
Any of Raymond Carver, minimalist
Raymond
writers.
Carver. Raymond Carver was, I read some of his work while I was in the States, but I think to be able to get Carver, you have to be very familiar with American life. And although I was in America, I was a foreign student and I didn't grow up in America. So there were a lot of things in Carver stories that I didn't get. Um, I mean, they seem simple and to me and easy to read, but I didn't get all um, the subtle, nuances about American life and Americana and things like that. So it was a little bit difficult to understand why he was regarded as such a great writer.
As far as your works are concerned, my reading is limited to only two books. I felt there is a lot of minimalist writing. You don't physically describe any of your characters. You
Mm-hmm.
just want to say what you want to say through the characters, and you make them say it. That's the reason I asked you.
No. That was a good observation. I think it's true that I tend to be closer to like the minimalist school because I'm when I write I'm not setting out to sort of create uh, a complete or detailed world of these characters or their lives. I'm not one of those like epic um, novelist. So I don't really care what they're wearing most of the time. Like I feel like if I'm going to write a character walking into a restaurant, that's all I have to say. Like a character walks into a restaurant, I don't care what kind of shoes they're wearing,
Yeah, yeah.
or unless the shoes are important to the stories. I don't really care too much.
Okay. When you're writing fiction, what is your workflow like? How do you approach? So, do you start with a clear idea or theme before you put down your pen on the paper?
It's different for each story, but when I was younger, I was not so interested in having a clear idea. I was interested in Zen philosophy. So when I started to write, I was really sort of experimenting with uh, something that I was inspired by John Cage's writing, which is inspired by Zen philosophy, which is about chance operation, or not thinking too much before doing something. So I used to start a lot of the story with like kind of immediate idea that came to mind and expanded the idea through the process of writing itself. Um, but sometimes I do have a complete idea before I start to write. Sometimes I do have a plot before I write. So it really depends on what I'm working on. I find it harder to write a novel without any idea. So
Okay.
so usually my novels are I do have in mind what I want to write about.
Mhm. Mhm.
But some short stories I use this sort of the method of uh, just like dealing with the immediacy of writing.
So kind of exploration, like your short stories or
Yeah,
self-exploration.
almost like more like art making, like
Hmm. Hmm.
sketching until you find uh, something of substance that you want to continue to work on.
Okay. When it comes to your stories in these two books, the
Mm.
sad part was and the moving part,
Mhm.
um, I felt as a reader, they're primarily about, there are a lot of solitary people with a lot of self reflection, and
Mhm.
there are references to religion, the Buddhism.
Mhm.
Mm, is there any particular reason for this?
Maybe that reflects my personality.
Mm,
Perhaps
mm,
I, when I was younger, I had the strong feeling that I was a kind of outcast.
mhm,
So I tended to appreciate stories about loners or outcasts or misfits,
mhm,
rebels. Um, so my early stories, I think, were just sort of you know f- something like a result from that influence.
mhm,
Um, but in terms of religion, I mean, if you Thai, if you grew up in a typical Thai family, uh, you're going to automatically be Buddhist. Um, I mean, unless you grow up in a different religion in your family, but a typical Thai family, you would learn, you would study Buddhism in school. You would experience um, Buddhist ceremonies, Buddhist traditions, Buddhist uh, worship places, things like that, temples. You visit the temples a lot. So that was sort of given, it was like conditioned. Uh, I did not choose to be interested in Buddhism, but when I grew up, I became interested in on my own a different kind of Buddhism, which was Mahayana Buddhism, through my interest of Japanese culture and um, Zen philosophy. Uh, yeah, so it was something that I discovered on my own, I think, later.
now, when it comes to certain specific stories, I belong. It's a very interesting story as such. It's a beautiful, lovely little story. Where
Uh-huh.
again there are references to Zen philosophy, I guess. The way
Mm-hmm.
it's very well written.
Thank
And
you.
same is the case with the schoolgirl's diary is one more interesting story which I like.
Thank you.
It's written very very well, and somehow you got into the mind of a kid.
Yeah, that was the intention to
Uh-huh.
to try to write as if I was actually that little girl.
Yeah, yeah.
It was interesting.
Mm, and when she says 1 plus 1 may not be two,
Mm.
it rings true. The kind of the explanation she gives why 1 plus 1 is not two.
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
it's very
yeah.
very
Because in
logically put. Yeah.
in life, in real life, a lot of times, outside of mathematics,
Hmm.
you find that it's not always the case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this Miss Space and Sharp Sleeper, right? I can't talk about all the stories, but because of the paucity of time, I'll talk about a couple of stories. Miss Space
Right.
again is a very interesting story because
Yeah.
when many a time, we focus on things which are really irrelevant. you know
Mm.
Rather, he keeps
Yes.
talking
Yes.
about
Yes.
the space. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
a very interesting way to look at the character as such.
That story. Um, Miss Space in particular um, is about a woman, a young woman who has a very peculiar way of writing.
Correct.
Like she has a lot of spaces between words. And actually, in Thai, the way Thai is written is like a string of
Oh,
word of letters. So it's very unusual to have a lot of space, a lot of spaces between the letters. But the story was inspired by a real person that I knew at the time who actually wrote like that. Um, and a combination of that true portrait of that person with the kind of um, my uh, poking fun of people like hyper intellectuals who theorize about everything.
okay.
So
Okay.
I have a kind of a love-hate relationship with theory,
Okay.
like
Right.
theoretical people, because
Right.
I do love to read philosophy and theory and criticism and things like I'm sort of almost addicted to that. But at the same time, I find them, when people uh, take everything too seriously,
Mhm,
is also
mhm,
funny. So,
mhm.
that was a there's a kind of poking fun of that whole field of
Yeah.
intellectual life.
That guy is a loner, right?
Yeah,
Obviously, he's interested in the girl,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
but he keeps talking about the spaces all the time.
Yes, yes, yes. Instead of trying to get to know the
The
girl, yeah,
person. Yeah. Yeah.
the person, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And Maruth by the seaside, right, is one more
Mm,
story. Where
mm-hmm.
the way you have written it, it's the character. I think they talk about breaking the fourth wall or something. There is a concept where the character comes into the story, starts directly talking to the readers.
Yeah.
It's written in a very very interesting way. Uh, what is the meaning of Maruth in Thai?
Um, Means the sea.
Sea, is it? Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
In Sanskrit, it is wind, I think. Wind.
Oh, really? Mm,
Yeah,
okay.
Marut is wind.
Mm,
Oh,
mm.
were you gunning for the critics in that story?
Yeah, I was, kind of a brat.
Okay.
I was just like poking fun of people.
Yeah.
Um, I don't write stuff like that anymore these days,
Okay.
but I think at the time I was really sort of into criticizing the critics. You
Okay.
know,
Yeah, I
it
felt so.
was that was my intention.
Mm.
Um, and that particular story, I think now there is a word to label it. It's probably meta fiction.
Mm-hmm.
People
Mm-hmm.
call it
Mm-hmm.
these days.
Mm.
So it's story about writing stories, about
Right.
writing characters, which is even at the time when I wrote that was not new. I
Oh,
mean,
okay.
a lot of people wrote like that before.
Yeah. Yeah, you talked about the critiques, and I'm interested to know what is the literary scene in Thailand today about writing, publishing, fiction, non-fiction.
Um, hmm. When I was writing, when I started to write in the late '90s and early 2000s, it was quite lively. The scene was, there were a lot of young writers becoming well known.
Hmm.
Um, there was a larger scene of, like indie culture, like indie music,
Hmm.
independent cinema,
Hmm.
uh, uh, indie writers, Um, so I was sort of part of that whole scene uh, at the time, and a lot of books getting published, a lot of new magazines being published. Uh, But now I think it's a little bit different. I think people, um, as I said before, a lot of translated fiction, uh, and I think the young people today they tend to look sort of beyond Thailand, beyond Thai culture. Uh, you know, uh, also because of the internet, everybody knows what's going on in the West, in the States, in the UK, in Europe, in Japan. So a lot of books from those, like the what's popular in the States now get translated in Thailand. What's popular in Japan is translated in Thailand. Yeah, so people still read, um, and we do have some good bookshops in Bangkok. Not that many, but the ones that we do have are pretty decent. Um, but in terms of local writers, I think the situation has not improved. I mean, it's quite difficult to live as a writer, especially writing literature. Everybody who writes generally has to work different jobs, or write as more like a side job. Um, yeah, so it's not easy to be only a writer, to write as a profession.
So you mean to say people don't read Thai literature much?
Unfortunately, I don't think as much as they should, probably, because there's still, like new writers writing these days, but they're not as known, or as, you know the whole local writing scene is not as exciting as it used to be.
Okay.
And like people from my generation are still around. So, a lot of people who started to write around the same time as I did, still writing.
Mhm.
Um, some of them are getting recognition abroad as well. I
Mhm.
think now more and more Thai literature is getting translated, especially to English and Japanese, um, maybe Chinese. Um, so that like looking at that side of the industry, it seems to be okay, but I think it's harder for younger generation, younger writers to survive.
But people read books in general. Reading culture is still there. People read Western fiction, probably. People read.
Yeah, but generally nonfiction does better business than
Oh,
fiction.
the sad part was is the first book of Thai fiction that was translated into English. You wrote it in the year 2000, and 2018, I think it has come out.
It wasn't the first book to be translated to English,
Hmm.
but it was the first to be translated and published commercially in the UK. In the past, some Thai stories and books were published. I mean, were translated into English, but a lot of most of the time they were, published by like a university press,
Hmm.
or like very limited to um, Thai studies.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so I think my book was the first to be, to go through like the process of commercial publishing, and to be available widely in bookshops in the UK, things like that.
After that, I think there are other books too, which are coming into,
Yeah,
which are
yeah,
getting
yeah, yeah.
published, right?
Yes, Tuted Access has published more Thai literature now. So I think another one is coming out soon as well.
Now, how did it happen? Moi Popok Sekul is the one who translated the book wonderfully into English. Obviously, I
Yeah.
read only the English versions. How did it happen? Did she approach you, or how did it all start? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. She approached me. She was, um, I think, translating my work as her graduate thesis. When I used to still run a bookshop, uh, she came to the bookshop, and she left me a note. I didn't meet her first at first. She left me a note and with like an email address, saying that she was, getting my permission to translate my book into English. So I thought she was a student. So I thought, why not let a student do do her work? So I wrote back and said, sure, do whatever you want. I mean, I really didn't think too much about
Hmm.
it. It wasn't like I was thinking, oh wow, she's going to translate my book and then it's going to be published in the UK. That was not on my mind at all.
So this translation process, was it collaborative, or she has done it on her own? How was it?
Yeah, eventually she sent me her drafts of translation, and I helped to correct some words here and there, or to give her some comments. But it wasn't that much. I
Hmm.
mean,
Hmm.
she. I really have to thank her for getting my work to a wider
Correct.
readership.
Correct.
Um, because she did everything. She translated the story. She approached the publisher. She went to book fairs
Hmm.
to shop my book around. And so I mean, I really have Mui to thank for everything that's happened.
Yeah, yeah, it's very nicely done. Lovely
Yeah,
translation.
because when she approached me, I was like, I really thought that it was just going to be her thesis,
Hmm.
and nothing would happen after that. It was just, I had no expectation.
Uh, this Kwam Na Ja Pen, rough translation in Thai would be Thai into English would be probability, right? The title of the,
Probability,
yes, yes.
yeah, probability in the mathematical term, like the
Mathematical, yeah, right, right.
mathematical,
But,
yeah.
but I like the sad part was, the title.
Mm,
I liked it better. Probably that's more apt than probability, I felt. Because all these stories, no, they are open to interpretation, and people, majority of the stories, people don't focus on what is really required, right? They
yeah,
focus on something else. Even the endings are like that. Majority of the stories, at least.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I came up with the sad part was as a title because I thought, um, it has a nice. It actually from a story in the book,
Okay, okay.
the one called the Crying Party,
Yeah, 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 yeah. That's
um,
lovely story too. Yes.
and I thought that this was a nice little, you know, set of words to use as a title because it has a mysterious ring to it.
Correct.
Like the sad part was what, and I'm drawn to sad stories. So I thought like if somebody came up to me and said the sad part was, and then just walked away, I'd be like, what? What the hell are you talking about?
Right, right. No, no, it sets the tone for for all the stories. Makes
Mm,
you
mm.
think.
Yeah,
With the title in your mind, you can read every story and probably understand it and try
yeah,
to
yeah, yeah.
analyze it better.
Oh, I'm glad you got that. That's nice.
There are altogether about 20 books you wrote in Thai fiction.
Right.
Right now, we have only two books that were translated. When are we going to see the others in English?
Yeah, it's difficult, I think, because uh, I published a lot of books, but in Thai, if you're a writer, you also write, like magazine columns and essays, and so a lot of my books were collection of those
Hmm.
articles that I wrote, or the essays I wrote for a particular magazine. So in terms of fiction, like short stories and novels, I've written 5 novels, um, and a bunch of story collections. So altogether, not really as many as you think, because a lot of those books were like essays and
Oh,
like magazine articles, yeah, nonfiction.
so some of them are going to get translated in the near future.
I don't know. I I'm hoping that maybe like newer works will be translated, because like my writing is now drastically different from the way I used to write.
Mhm.
And both of these books that you've read, the stories in them were written almost 20 years ago. Yeah. So now, I am hoping that my newer stuff, especially like my new novels, um, would have, enough, uh, something to would be enough interest for foreign readers to be translated.
And finally, when is this web series that you are working on is going to get released?
The current one,
Yeah, the current one, yes.
probably 2000, like 2025, maybe
Okay, 25.
early 2025.
Okay, thank you, Prabda. It has been
No, thank
wonderful to
you.
have you to talk to us for almost an hour
No,
non-stop. Thank you.
such an honor. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much.